You're gonna like this one today, man. It's how to mystically stop people from yakking and nagging you. Oh man, you're gonna like this. And it has to do with mysticism and anti-noise technology. So it is a mystical way of stopping people from yakking and nagging at you. Man, a lot of life is just figuring out how not to be tossed around and upset by all the changes around you. In this article, I'm going to describe one way to do this, and I'll also describe how to rotate in space and mystically travel to the origin of sounds. So one day I was looking at anti-noise technology. It was the idea of creating an equal and opposite wave in such a way as to cancel any arriving sound. And I figured that a person should be able to use that principle to remain pristine and untouched, even if somebody was yakking and nagging at them. That no sound would bother them and the net change would be zero. Man, it's the seeking of peace and steadiness and tranquility. That's what I'm talking about. It's something like the image stabilization on a camera. You know, you'd be on a bumpy road like that, but somehow the picture can be just as smooth as glass. Same if it's tipping this way, man. Or it's also like adding weight to the correct side of a tipping sailboat to keep it from tipping over, but doing it earlier and having the weight and timing so exact that it never even tips. Indeed, it never even feels the roughness of the wind or the waves. I discovered a way to use the frame of the human body to actually do this. It's a way to create and exactly place an equal and opposite sound that can balance any arriving sound, and it also goes beyond sounds. I discovered that using this method, it's possible to rest evenly where I am between the arriving inputs of sound and other sensations, at the intersection of opposites, right between them. Practicing in this way, there's no place needed to flee to. So man, I'm writing this, here's a bit of a disclaimer. It's from my background in mysticism and world traditions. I'm not giving it as health, medical, or other advice. Please be sure to read and follow all the disclaimers, both the ones on my website called PrestonFlatt.com and also the ones below the video. And man, this is mystical stuff we're talking about here, okay? And that means it's not going to be easy to put it into words. And I know for sure some of the things I talk about are going to be pretty hard to follow. But it's still important to go over them just because, to the best of my ability, best of my knowledge, they haven't been written or described before. I wrote them out on my website on PrestonFlatt.com, but we'll go over them here in this video. Now I'm going to go over two methods, but both of these methods, they're not as easy as the simplest method, which is just using the human frame to set up the equivalent of an old-fashioned scale. Having gathered 2 points and abiding in the midst of them to then surf the place between opposites, no matter how the world of creation would present itself to you. It's a very vague thing. It's really ungraspable unless you know how to gather 2 or more points and use the human frame to set up the equivalent of that scale. And that way is much easier. I did talk about that in my video called How to Mystically Surf or Skateboard Without a Board. And that's, you can find the video on that. That way is much easier, but the two methods in this article, man, is just another way of describing the same thing, kind of from different angles. So going over this will definitely help you understand that method. So in considering anti-noise technology and mysticism, here's how it came to me. I was thinking about a sweet, sweet sound off to the side, man. You know what I mean? Some sweet, wonderful, beautiful, appealing person. And that when I heard that, I'd want to go directionally toward that place. I'd want to, from here, go outward to obtain that, right? However, I figured, man, if I could create an equal and opposite appealing sound to the left of me, then I could experience just resting where I was as if in the midst of all that sweet, sweet sound, and equally experiencing both, but not having to go anywhere. So in other words, I could stay in this place as I had originally established, and I wouldn't be buffeted by the desire to move toward anything directionally. And I also wouldn't be feeling the need to move away from it. And because both arriving sounds, they arrived at the same time, I could just stay in the middle between them, as if at the heart of sound, and wrapped equally from both sides. Practicing in this way, you can find that this way is a very real way of practicing when you check out that other article. I didn't feel the same need to directionally flee from here to any other place. And it seemed that this method of not needing to chase after objects, right, not needing to keep going out after one or going out after another, and also not needing to flee from them, it would be a way to not be driven to and fro and buffeted around by life. That I could keep resting as it was in the beginning in this original changeless location at the intersection of opposites. And this method solved what I was referring to a minute ago. It solved aversion and affinity. Aversion means wanting to avoid by moving away, and affinity means being attracted to. In other words, the being just jerked around in life due to wanting to avoid some things and being attracted to others. And this is because having established evenness on each side, to obtain the one would be to lose the other, and it wouldn't make sense to travel in either direction, but to enjoy relaxing and abiding in the center. And I found that it is actually possible to do this, and not just with sounds either, but with the other senses too. Because in life there's all kinds of input: sounds, sights, smells, tastes, thoughts, feelings, everything. And it all arrives from one moment to the next, presenting itself in ever new ways, and each presentation is an invitation to either abide in this place or to forsake this place, forsake this one good thing, and go anxiously about in the world. So it may sound dumb. I don't know. It is hard to follow, like I said, but even with the example of a cookie, right? There's a cookie over here, right? Of course, the appeal of the cookie, this is slightly different, because the appeal is that you want to eat the thing, right? And if you just put a cookie on each side, you still got to eat them to have that satisfaction. Unless just being around them, man. Maybe just being around them will be so ultimately satisfying that you could establish a cookie on each side and rest right in the middle. But while you're resting there, don't forget to get the cookies and eat them. Because, when you have cookies equally on both sides, it's like being tucked in at the center of a singular cookie. And there's no reason to directionally travel from this place or flee from this place at the center in any direction. And when you eat the cookie, also, man, its satisfyingness will feel that it's locationally being distributed evenly within you. So in that way, you are one with it, and also you don't have to travel. It's the same if there's a sound or something that you want to move away from too. You have a sound on one side and one on the other, and then you just rest between them. It is coming from somewhere, an origination point that seems like an other than. So it comes from somewhere, and there's a clear direction to travel to get away from it. There is, however, a way that you can create an equal and opposite sound. So here's one here, another one there. Experience it evenly on all sides and find rest at the source of that sound. You can actually rotate in space and travel to the origin of that object of consideration. And I'm going to explain that later in this article, how your center, you'll find that it's not different than the center of that of that origination point. And then between the two, the sound arises roundly from it. And you can still abide in the center, even of one singular object of consideration. In other words, if you rotate in space and match your center to that, then the sound will arise evenly on all sides of you, and you can abide in the center untouched. I will explain that later, probably in this video, if I'm remembering right. So, there's a way that you can create an equal and opposite sound. You can experience it evenly on all sides, and you can find rest at the source of that sound. And locationally, even find the place that would be the origin of that sound, but even before that sound originates, even before it generates. We'll talk about that in this article too. And so, in other words, the desire to directionally flee would be no more, because you're in the middle, and you can reconcile the arising of creation on all sides if you've traveled to that distant object of consideration and matched up your center. And I say if you travel, but really you neither come nor go. You'll learn about that in this video too. It's something like being yoked, right? And having the yoke so perfectly placed and the yoke so evenly distributed that even when the weight increases, right, the place in the middle is always comfortable and good to go. That's what it's like, even if it's something that you normally might want to flee from. But because you're at the center, you're steady and you're peaceful there. It's kind of the same way that an upright tent pole of an old-fashioned style tent, you know, the triangular looking ones, they got one pole in the center. It doesn't even care how heavy the tent canvas is if it's distributed evenly. It will enjoy being comfortably located right where it is, whether the tent is light or heavy. And the heavier the tent, it's like the heavier the hug enjoyed at its place at ground zero, and therefore it is not a problem. And another example that's perhaps something like it is it's like being the still needle on a record player that witnesses and fully attends the turning of the record. So the record's turning toward it, right? And in that groove, it's just fully attending it. It attends the turning of the record. the sweetness of the music in the dialing up of changes around it, ever steady and untouched. And this can be done with sound and with the other senses. But don't worry, if it's been hard to follow, I'm going to give you a couple other examples that will hopefully help it make sense. So basically, you just generate an equal and opposite one. There's one here, and generate one here. And you do it in such an exact way as to rest steady. And all results conclude with you, as ever, witnessing the world and the arising and falling of its changes, while being comfortably established in the changeless place between opposites. But there's another thing that I discovered, and it's the second method that I'm going to go over, and I call it the mystic drinking straw. So it's the lesson of the drinking straw and how it solves the same directionality example. Like I was saying, man, sound comes from somewhere. It has its origination point and has directionality from its origin to the place where it is heard. And you could even measure that distance. Similarly, imagine this is a drinking straw, okay? Full disclosure, it's not, it's an ink pen. But, okay. Similarly, from one end of a drinking straw to the other, it would show a distance. The straw would be perhaps 10 to 12 inches, right? And this is shorter because it's an ink pen. And so, you know, this one side here and one side there, two different points. You know, how can you reconcile that 10 to 12 inches if it's a straw, or the shorter distance if it's an ink pen? You know, it used to be common for these hippie types to walk around saying, man, we are one, right? We are one, we are one. But then they look around, right? And the whole world seems separated out into separate objects and distances. And because of that, you may not feel like you are one. In the same way, you could look at the straw or the ink pen and know that one end of the straw or the ink pen right here, let's see, is not the other end of the straw or the ink pen. Obviously, one here, one there, two different places. And so even though you may want it to be one, there is that irreconcilable distance from here, if it's a straw, to there, or from here to here, if it's a pen. Well, here's what happened. I was training in the way that I'd written above, that as each sound arose, I would just imagine that at that very instant, and exactly matching the arising of an exact and opposite sound. And I was experiencing that I was able to do that, and that I could stay in the middle, that I could remain locationally in the place between opposites, between right and left. I also realized that the sound itself has its origination point, and that from the place that I was hearing it, if I could just turn and look directly at it, the sound from over there would be extended roundly from the origination point over distance to the reception point where I was hearing it. So roundly, right? And I was still able to abide unchanged in the middle of it. I realized that there was a place at the center of the origination point of that sound that was not different from the center of the one receiving it, and that it was possible to establish a correspondence from the center of this place where I am with the center of the point of origination of the sound. Of course, for this example, it was over there, but we can move it this way, right? So there's the center of the origination point of the sound, and then there's my center. And it's just one, like this, right? And it was almost like between the two was a cosmic wormhole or a mystic gateway that bridged any gap and closed any distance. And that wormhole wasn't any big sci-fi type of deal or anything like that. It's just that the center could be the same center, not in any ultra unusual way with sparkles and lights, but it's just the way it was. And I thought, well, yeah, that's pretty cool. And so what happened is I mentioned this in my Tai Chi class to my teacher. But, man, I used the example of an uncooked spaghetti noodle that just had one central axis. That when you look at it from the side, there's an apparent irreconcilable distance from one end to the other. But if you can just rotate it in space, it superimposes the one end upon the other, and instantly they are just one point. And because I kept coming up with ideas like that in class, and I'm sure a lot of them seemed kind of off track from the lessons that he was trying to teach. His nickname for me was Bear It, B-E-A-R, and then I-T, as in, that guy's going to yak, but just bear with him and be patient. And eventually, he might just shut up long enough and stop asking these kind of questions so I can finally teach the class. It was all good-natured, and he's a great guy. And all the Tai Chi students, man, we got along well, and we appreciated the humor and teachings of our Las Vegas Tai Chi teacher. At this time, it was the teacher named Master Alwyn Sit Sun Leong from Hong Kong. Okay, so I told the class about the uncooked spaghetti noodle example. What an idiot. I hadn't thought of the drinking straw example yet, because you can rotate the drinking straw in space and superimpose the one end upon the other. And as you look right down through the straw, the irreconcilable separateness of the 10 to 12 inches, it disappears, man. It disappears in just one central point, and the evenness of creation roundly surrounding it. And one point can be surfed. When you can find the center of an object of consideration, it's no longer a separate object. It disappears. It's kind of like if you can find your enemy also, right? Your enemy will disappear. There's a saying, and that's a saying that I've heard. I don't know who said it or what, but if you can find your enemy will disappear. Because an enemy can only be an other than, as this place is other than this place. If you can find them, though, which is like this, but if they're still different than you, then you have not found them. You may have found still that whatever superficial differences in appearance are there, but you still haven't truly found them. When you find them, you connect with them along this exact way that I'm talking about here. And as it was in the beginning, it is now, and it ever shall be. And there is no other There is just one center. In World War II, the stupid dummies, man, they'd build up a false, almost cartoon-like image of the enemy so they could get their people to kill or erase the cartoon and not worry about killing an actual human. I mean, it's easier to erase a cartoon off the face of the earth than to kill someone that's every bit as you are, right? And it is possible to be around a person, even someone that you might have thought would be an enemy, to be around them long enough that you can like them and you can see them in a different way. Each object of consideration has those boundaries that define it as separate, or at least make it seem as it is. It's external representation. But that has an exact center or arising point. And so externally there's a center, and there's also an internal representation when you think or imagine something. Somewhere within you, you can find it that there's an internal representation of that. And you can respond to that internal representation also in this very similar way. At any given moment, it has an exact location, an exact center, and an exact arising point. And there can be the separation into opposites, right and left, which is essentially what you find locationally at the borders, at the other end of the straw. So you have the borders, but then between the borders, the center can be arrived at. It could be here, or it could be like this, you see. Just like along the length of the straw, you just look right down it, and there's only one center. When you travel in this way, as if down the straw, it's not a directional thing, because you really don't depart from the place where you are. And in fact, because of that, that means you don't travel. I'll explain more about that, but really, it may seem that you move about in this world, but you really don't travel at all. It's possible to rotate that path in space and realize as its path just the one center. So you can surf this mystically changeless place. You know how hurricanes are, right? Similar to the peaceful eye of a hurricane, you just hold to the one changeless place within the walls of rest, of creation on all sides. It's the same thing. Like if this was a hurricane, right? The hurricane, it's because of the outer part that defines a place of rest right in the center. And you can use the walls of rest of that hurricane, that's what I call them, as a reference point, so as to abide exactly in the middle. And once you find that place, you can camp out there and you can literally surf it. If you set up the human body like a mystic yoke or like a mystic scale, you literally will be able to do what it says in Scripture, where it says, lean not unto your own understanding. You literally will surf the balance place between opposites as the world presents itself to you. So I should say, though, that, let's see. Okay, so you can surf this place. You can always camp there. But I want to say you're always in this place whether you know it or not. Now, I've already said that there's an easier way than the ones I went over today, and that's called how to mystically surf without a surfboard. That's a lot easier. And though in my writings and videos I often mention the example of a hurricane, with these spiritual exercises, you know how hurricanes will spin one direction or another, right? One direction is typhoon and the other is hurricane. With these exercises, there's usually not the assigned direction of spin. You see how there's directionality here, or this way. But rather it's just to show that in the midst of creation, in the midst of changing creation, there is that changeless place at the heart or the center, such as what a hurricane would have. And the rising and falling of new creation and combinations of life on all sides. So to summarize then, the two methods I wrote about in this article are, number one, to mystically generate an equal and opposite sound or representation, as described above, to rest unchanged at the center, similar to perhaps to image stabilization in a camera. It's like the arisal of life on one side instantly puts a counterbalance, and then that changes zero. The production of the sound, if we're talking about sounds, it instantly puts a counterbalance, and that is essentially the same as being turned in space and facing or aligning with the center or origination point of the object of consideration or of the sound, as in the second example. We bring it back and we're still right in the center. So, as in the drinking straw example, which I gave earlier, the second one is that you simply rotate the object. You could say that it seems like you're rotating, but actually you abide as steady. And you can rotate the object of consideration in space and mystically go to the center of the object of consideration as described, surfing that center for all arising changes. Beyond these, though, the best method and my favorite is just to set up the equivalent of a scale within the human frame. Man, it's easy and it's really a great method. And it's called the technique, it's a technique called how to mystically surf or skateboard without a board. And now here's the weird thing, as if none of this has been weird. When you practice these three seemingly varied methods, somewhat different perhaps, you'll realize that they are all the same method. Establishing an equal and opposite counterbalance, allowing you to rest in the middle, is the same thing. Turning the object of consideration in space, facing or aligning with the center or origination point of the sound, is the same thing. And just surfing the place between opposites. No matter the nature of the arriving changes, simply hold to and abide in the one good thing. This, rather than going outward and toiling and spinning in the world, taking thought for the morrow, this is the real meaning of devotion. And this reconciles the arrival of life's presentations around you. And whether you know it or not, it becomes a blessing to the world. Because most of the world is used to, when it presents itself, the rest of creation mismatches it, right? And that further buffets things and stirs things up in creation. But if you can establish the scale, you can learn that even with the arriving of, no matter what the presentations of life, through it all, accumulatively, you simply abide in the center. And since you've established the scale, the very instant that you start to lean, you feel it, because this technique is actually informative. You'll know exactly how much you departed, and you'll know exactly how to restore it. And man, this gives you surety in life. You know exactly how to be in the world. I mean, did you ever have the events of life just presenting themselves, and you're thinking, man, how should I be in the world? Should I stand taller? Should I try to put on a smile? You know, like someone says to you, smile, and you think, man, why'd you say that? I was feeling good till you said that, so now I got to manufacture like a fake smile just so you'll feel good, you know. And you don't want people thinking that you're standing there looking all sad or messed up, right? But that is when you don't know what to do in life. You don't know how you should be, what you should do. When you can learn to set up this mystic scale, this Christian yoke, or this very same as the cross, not to the right, not to the left, not too high, not too low. You literally know how to be in this world anytime and any place, and that is the real meaning of mysticism. To abide in me, not me here, but you can point to yourself when you say, abide in me, and hold to the one good thing, no matter how the world may present itself in endless invitations to forsake this one good thing and go anxiously outward in the world, seeking what you don't realize you already have right here. So, in review, there is apparent separation and distance in creation. One end here, one end there. And that's illustrated when you look at the drinking straw or the pen from the side. There is that apparent distance from one side to the other. And you can't say, I mean, from one way of considering it, you can't say that both sides are one because of that irreconcilable distance from one side to the other. I mean, look, they're located in different places in space, one here, one here. And to bring together and bridge the distance between these two sides, man, even that 10 to 12 inches if it's a straw, or shorter if it's a pen, it's as good as a mile. So basically, this is not reconciled with that because they're different places in space. But if you can rotate the straw in space, man, you can look right down the center, superimposing the center of one end upon the center of the other, upon which looking you realize that it is just one center. And as you surf it, there's no reason to flee from that center in any direction. Because just like the center of a hurricane, the center of that object of consideration that is not different from the place of peace in which you sit, it is just one peaceful center. And there's just the circular appearance or presenting of the world on all sides. And it may seem stormy, just like the outside of a hurricane may seem stormy. But there's a place of rest in the middle. Okay. So there's no reason to flee from that center in any direction. And even if a sound or other missing of the mark should arise, that's what we're talking about, man, missing of the mark. There's a center of the bullseye which does not miss the mark. And then creation outward from it, the toiling and spinning, that's what misses the mark. When you abide at the center, the arisings of life can be surfed and reconciled in such a way so as to have a net change of 0. You simply abide in the center and you don't lean. Without establishing this mystic scale, it's just too vague, man. But if you can establish this scale, even if you don't know why you're leaning, I mean, it could be one thing, but more likely it's just the accumulation of all of life and creation presenting itself to you. You don't even have to know what the reason is for the lean. You can simply, having established the scale, hold to the one good thing. Where two or more are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And you can know what is in the midst of them. So there's this tradition in Christianity that where two or more people are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them, right? So one way is to wait around till you can get two or more people together, and then you can practice that, right? Then God will be in the midst of them. But what I'm trying to tell you, man, is it works even if it's just two or more points. And with your human frame, you can sample two or more points. In this example, where I'm giving you the 2 points. But there's also a way that you can gather the the 2 or more points. And I talk about that in the article on how to mystically pray prayer beads. Okay, I'm just about done here. And then you simply abide in the center and don't lean. It's a no-brainer, man. That's how you take no thought for the morrow, by the way. It's a no-brainer. That's what you do with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, because your mind is and senses are so fully on to surf this place. And yet it's not the toiling and spinning of the mind in directionality going outward. All the changes of creation can be surfed in this way, and surfing in this way is life. It is living. You can trace the arisings of creation back to their point of arising and attend and surf the place that was even before the creation arose, the place before the arising of and separation into opposites. So I've already said that creation, well, it had to have an origination point, so you can trace it back. But now I'm going to give you the mystical example of not the burping cricket, but the chirping cricket. And so you can apply this to the example of a chirping cricket. You know, crickets chirp by rubbing their wings together, right? But you could trace it back to the place before the wing and the wing came together. The place before that. And you can trace it back to before the arising of the intention to chirp, before the movement of the mind. There's a place there that hasn't even arisen yet. At the slightest arising, you can surf that too, man. It gets really profound. So before the arising of the thought of the cricket's chirp, there is similarly a place as at the end of the straw, which can be traveled to. You can ride out the arising of that creation as it arises, like it starts to be modified and come about. You can ride that out to modify it, to even it, to use antinoise technology to reconcile it, even at its first arising. And whether you neutralize its arising or not, you are ever constantly in the place before duality, before right and left, exactly where you sit. Between the place where you sit and that distant consideration, it is like the center of the straw. But just finding it, you are there already, and distance is gone. You are simply there at the center. And there's another example, the example of the mystical movie screen. From constancy, you can know the nature of the arisings and fallings of the world around you. Similar to just a movie screen, right? The steadiness of a movie screen. Just as if you were the steady movie screen upon which a movie of life should play. In that steadiness, there isn't a particle of light that hits that screen with any rising and falling or directionality that you can't know from the steadiness of the unchanging screen. And you know it because you know yourself. There is no arriving directionality that isn't witnessed in the newness of its change. So you being yoked, having established the scale, which is like a yoke, right? You can be at the center of any consideration. There is strength there, and there's not any direction that would make sense to chase after or flee to. You are already, I'm trying to say this, man, you're already in the middle of the cookie. So it's possible to set up the scale, find the internal representation of an origination point, and trace it back to before the directionality arose. Perhaps rotate it in space, go to its point of origin, and have all the directionality that diverges because you've gone there, have it all extend outwardly from you while you rest in the middle, having gone nowhere, but surfing both all of life around you and life as it corresponds to that distant object of consideration too. It's just one center, and all around it is just one consideration. You can surf the pristine place no matter how the world may move and change. So final thoughts, all changes come from somewhere. Creation arises from somewhere. And you, if you are yoked, are already abiding in a place that is not different from the place of origin of a sound or of any object of consideration. Auto mechanics, they may not know it, but they travel to the origin of sound all the time when they listen to what's hitting together inside an engine. It's possible to be at the origination place of that sound, and that's why when people run their fingernails down a chalkboard and you feel that that uncomfortable feeling in the spine, I mean, it's literally affecting you. Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked here. Let's keep with it. Okay. So you can trace it back to the place that is ever steady before the arising of sounds. And by the way, that is already the exact place where you always effortlessly sit. So what I'm saying is, man, the outer world's entertaining, but you are already fully equipped from the universal factory. You are already at the ground zero of your existence, and you don't have to go anywhere or do anything, man. That place is not different from the place where you are and where you sit. And when you sit in this way, as scaled without leaning, it's a way to kind of bless the world, or it's a way to be in life that avoids a lot of the turbulence and the nagging and all of that. And this method is beyond ego. This is a pretty interesting consideration. It is beyond ego because it isn't a matter of how the individual, remember I talked about the cartoon? It isn't a matter of how the individual cartoon of a person moves and changes, but rather it is just simply locational. When it's locational, it doesn't involve the ego. It's just where it is. And ego itself is like the cartoon. You know, the cartoon's a creation. Even that has its center, though. The ego can be placed between opposites. It's the cartoon of the ego can be placed between opposites. its center can be found, and the coloring, drawings, and individual stroke marks of the cartoon written in directionality can all be reconciled. If you can find your ego, it will disappear. And that's a quote which I've heard before, but I don't remember who said it. So you do seem to move and change and travel through life, though you really neither come nor go. You exist in the midst of moving and changing creation itself, and you abide always effortlessly in the center. Unless your center is clear, though, it may be hard for you to realize this, though. So I've written another article on how to make your center clear, and that's the one on Sufis and whirling dervishes, why and how they spin, and the consideration of, is it possible to spin the human body in such a way as to, abiding in the center, realize something similar to the calm and peaceful eye of the hurricane. So look for that video, and also look for that article. Man, would you please subscribe, and also visit my website. It's called PrestonFlatt.com, and I really appreciate you. Thanks a lot.